Good evening, sleepy listeners. Tonight we begin with a tale that unfolds, not in the chaos of battle or the thunder of adventure, but in the gentle quiet of two hearts learning to trust. This is a story about Batman and Catwoman, but not the version you might expect from comic books or movies. Tonight, we explore their softer side, the moments between the masks when Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle discover something more precious than any treasure they've ever sought. So settle into your pillows, pull your blankets close, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always wonderful to know who's joining us for these peaceful journeys into sleep. This isn't a story of chase scenes through Gotham's rooftops or dramatic confrontations in the shadows. Instead, it's about the quiet conversations that happen after the city sleeps, the gentle moments when two people who've spent their lives hiding behind personas finally allow themselves to be seen. Bruce Wayne wasn't always the brooding figure we know today. There was a time when his smile came easier, when the weight of protecting Gotham hadn't yet carved permanent worry lines around his eyes. And Selina Kyle, before she became the mysterious Catwoman, was simply a young woman trying to find her place in a world that seemed determined to push her aside. Their story begins not with a dramatic meeting on a rooftop, but with a chance encounter at a charity gala in Wayne Manor. Bruce, barely 25, and still learning how to balance his public persona with his growing mission to help Gotham, found himself overwhelmed by the endless small talk and forced smiles. He'd stepped away from the crowd, seeking refuge in his father's old library, when he discovered someone else had the same idea. Selina sat curled in an oversized leather chair, a book of poetry balanced on her knees, completely absorbed in the written words before her. She looked up when Bruce entered, expecting to be asked to leave, or at least questioned about her presence in the private wing of the manor. Instead, Bruce simply apologized for the interruption and turned to go. But something in her expression, a mixture of wariness and genuine curiosity, made him pause. Perhaps it was the way she held the book, like it was something precious, or the fact that she'd chosen Wordsworth over the champagne and conversation downstairs. Whatever it was, Bruce found himself asking if she was enjoying the poetry, and Selina found herself answering honestly, instead of with the defensive quip she usually reserved for strangers. They talked for nearly an hour that evening, discussing literature and art, while the party continued without them downstairs. Bruce learned that Selina worked part-time at the Gotham Public Library while studying art history, that she'd grown up in the city's East End, and that she had an almost encyclopedic knowledge of classical poetry. Selina discovered that Bruce Wayne wasn't just the shallow playboy the newspapers portrayed, that he asked thoughtful questions and listened to her answers with genuine interest, and that he seemed as uncomfortable with the wealth and attention surrounding him as she was with being surrounded by it. When the evening ended, Bruce walked her to the front door, past guests who were still mingling in the grand foyer. Neither of them exchanged phone numbers or made plans to meet again, but both carried something away from that conversation, a small spark of connection that neither had expected to find in such an unlikely place. Selina returned to her small apartment in the East End, to her books and her part-time job and her quiet life, but she found herself thinking about the young man who had treated her like an equal when he had every reason to look down on her. Bruce returned to his guests and his responsibilities, but the memory of her laugh and the way she'd quoted Keats from memory stayed with him long after the last guest had departed. Weeks passed before they encountered each other again. This time, it was Bruce who was in the library, researching historical crime patterns in Gotham for reasons he couldn't explain to anyone, least of all himself. He was hunched over a stack of old newspapers, his usually perfect hair falling across his forehead, when Selina approached his table with a cup of coffee and a knowing smile. She'd noticed him struggling with the microfilm machine and offered to help, her familiarity with the library's systems evident in the way she quickly located exactly what he needed. They fell into conversation as easily as they had at the manor. But this time, the setting was different. Here, surrounded by books and the quiet hum of people pursuing knowledge, Selina was in her element. She moved through the stacks with confident grace, pulling volumes that related to Bruce's research, offering insights that came from years of studying the city's history and culture. Bruce found himself genuinely impressed by her intelligence and intuition, the way she could connect seemingly unrelated historical events and find patterns that he'd missed entirely. When the library closed that evening, Bruce offered to walk Selina home. She lived several miles away, and the autumn air had turned crisp as darkness fell over the city. They walked slowly, taking a meandering route through Gotham's quieter neighborhoods, their conversation flowing from history to philosophy to their dreams for the future. Selina spoke about wanting to work in museum conservation, about preserving beautiful things for future generations to discover and appreciate. Bruce talked about feeling responsible for making Gotham a better place, though he kept his specific plans vague, unsure how to explain the calling he felt toward something more direct than charitable donations and board meetings. As they walked, neither of them noticed the way they'd unconsciously synchronized their steps, or how Bruce had positioned himself between Selina and the street, or how Selina had begun gesturing more animatedly as she became more comfortable with his presence. They were simply two young people discovering that they enjoyed each other's company, that conversation with the right person could make even the longest walk feel too short. When they reached Selina's building, a modest brick structure with flower boxes in the windows and a well-maintained front garden, she invited Bruce up for coffee. Her apartment was small, but carefully decorated, filled with books and plants and artwork she'd collected from local artists. The walls were painted in warm colors that made the space feel larger than it was, and every piece of furniture seemed to have been chosen with both function and beauty in mind. Bruce realized he'd never been in a space that felt so genuinely like a home, where every object seemed to reflect the personality of the person who lived there. They sat on her small couch, cups of coffee growing cold between them as they continued talking. Selina showed Bruce some of her favorite art books, pointing out techniques and historical context with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a passion. Bruce found himself telling her about his parents, about the weight of living up to their legacy, and the loneliness that sometimes came with the Wayne name. It wasn't something he'd ever discussed so openly with anyone, but something about Selina's attentive presence made him feel safe to be vulnerable. The evening stretched on until they both realized how late it had become. Bruce offered to call a car, but Selina insisted he could take the bus, that she didn't want him to feel obligated to treat her differently because of his wealth. It was a small moment, but it revealed something important about both of them. Selina valued her independence and didn't want to be seen as someone who needed rescuing or special treatment. Bruce appreciated her directness and the way she didn't defer to him simply because of his family's status in Gotham society. As Bruce waited for the bus, Selina stood with him at the stop, neither of them quite ready for the evening to end. When the bus arrived, Bruce hesitated before boarding, turning back to ask if she'd like to have dinner sometime. Selina smiled and said yes, but suggested they meet at a small cafe near the library, instead of one of Gotham's expensive restaurants. She wanted to maintain the equality they'd established, to keep their connection based on who they were as people, rather than the circumstances they'd been born into. Their first official date was everything both of them had hoped it would be, and nothing like either of them had expected. The cafe Selina had chosen was warm and intimate, with mismatched furniture and local artwork covering the walls. They ordered simple food and lingered over their meal for hours, their conversation ranging from serious topics to silly observations about the other patrons. Bruce discovered that Selina had a quick wit and a talent for gentle teasing that made him laugh more than he had in months. Selina saw glimpses of the humor and warmth that Bruce kept hidden beneath his public persona, moments when his carefully constructed facade slipped to reveal the genuine person underneath. As they began spending more time together, their relationship developed a comfortable rhythm. Bruce would stop by the library during Selina's shifts, sometimes bringing her lunch, or simply sitting quietly nearby while she worked. Selina would join Bruce for walks through different neighborhoods of Gotham, sharing her knowledge of the city's hidden history and pointing out architectural details he'd never noticed. They attended art exhibitions and poetry readings together, discovering shared interests and introducing each other to new experiences. What made their growing connection special wasn't the grand gestures or expensive gifts that Bruce could easily afford. Instead, it was found in the small moments of consideration and care they showed each other. When Selina mentioned she'd been wanting to see a particular art installation, but couldn't afford the museum admission, Bruce didn't simply buy her a ticket. Instead, he researched the museum's volunteer program and discovered they offered free admission to docents in training. He casually mentioned the opportunity to Selina, who applied and was accepted, giving her not just access to the exhibition, but a chance to deepen her knowledge of art history while contributing to something meaningful. Similarly, when Bruce confided that he sometimes felt isolated despite being surrounded by people at social events, Selina didn't offer sympathy or advice. Instead, she taught him a game she'd learned as a child, where you create stories about the people around you based purely on observation. At the next charity function Bruce attended, he found himself quietly inventing elaborate backstories for the other guests, imagining the librarian who moonlighted as a detective, or the banker who secretly wrote romance novels. The game transformed what had been a tedious obligation into something almost entertaining, and he realized Selina had given him a way to feel connected to his surroundings without having to perform or pretend. Their relationship deepened through these thoughtful exchanges, each learning to see the world through the other's perspective. Bruce began to understand how differently Gotham looked when you weren't born into privilege, how the city's beauty and opportunities weren't equally accessible to everyone. Selina helped him see beyond the statistics and charitable reports to the real people whose lives were affected by poverty and inequality. She never lectured or made him feel guilty about his advantages, but her stories and observations opened his eyes to experiences he'd never considered. In turn, Bruce showed Selina aspects of responsibility and legacy that she'd never had reason to contemplate. He spoke about the weight of family expectations and the pressure of knowing that his decisions could affect not just his own life, but the lives of everyone who worked for Wayne Enterprises. Through him, she began to understand that privilege came with its own burdens, that having resources meant constantly deciding how to use them wisely and ethically. She saw how seriously Bruce took his role as a steward of his family's wealth and influence. As autumn turned to winter, their meetings took on a cozier quality. They would spend long evenings in Selina's apartment, reading together on her small couch, with a shared blanket draped over their legs. Sometimes they read the same book, taking turns reading chapters aloud to each other, their voices mixing with the sound of rain against the windows. Other times, they read different books, simply enjoying each other's quiet presence, occasionally sharing an interesting passage or a particularly beautiful turn of phrase. Bruce discovered that Selina had a gift for creating atmosphere and comfort from very little. She could transform an ordinary evening into something magical, with nothing more than candles, soft music, and her complete attention. Her small apartment became a refuge for him, a place where he didn't have to be Bruce Wayne, the public figure, or the heir to a business empire. He could simply be himself, someone who enjoyed poetry and good conversation, and the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with someone who understood him. Selina found in Bruce a kind of steadiness she'd never experienced before. Despite his wealth and the demands on his time, he was remarkably reliable. When he said he would call, he called. When he made plans with her, he kept them. If something unavoidable came up, he explained honestly and made sure to reschedule rather than simply disappearing. This consistency was precious to someone who'd learned not to depend on others, who'd been disappointed too many times by people who made promises they didn't keep. One snowy December evening, as they walked through Gotham's historic district, looking at the holiday decorations, Selina noticed Bruce had grown quieter than usual. The anniversary of his parents' death was approaching, and though he hadn't mentioned it directly, she could sense the weight of memory settling over him. Instead of asking questions or trying to cheer him up, she simply took his hand and guided him into a small church where a choir was practicing Christmas carols. They sat in the back pew, listening to the voices rise and blend in the vaulted space. The music was beautiful and peaceful, filling the silence between them with something larger than words. Bruce felt some of the tension leave his shoulders as the familiar melodies washed over him, reminding him of childhood Christmases when his parents were alive, and the Wayne Manor felt warm and full of laughter. Selina squeezed his hand gently, not saying anything, just letting him know she was there. When the practice session ended, they walked home through the falling snow, their footsteps muffled by the white blanket covering the sidewalks. Bruce found himself talking about his parents in a way he rarely did, sharing not just the fact of their loss, but memories of who they'd been as people. He told Selina about his mother's laugh and the way his father had insisted on reading him bedtime stories, even when business kept him at the office late. He spoke about feeling responsible for carrying on their work and their values, about wanting to honor their memory by making Gotham a better place. Selina listened without trying to fix or solve anything, understanding that sometimes people just needed to be heard. When Bruce's voice trailed off, she shared some of her own memories of loss, of the grandmother who had raised her after her parents died, of learning to find family among friends when blood relations weren't available. She spoke about how grief changed over time, becoming less sharp but never entirely disappearing, woven into the fabric of who you became. Their conversations during this period were deeper and more intimate than anything either had experienced before. They talked about their fears and dreams, about the people they wanted to become, and the challenges that stood in their way. Bruce confided his growing sense that he needed to do more than just donate money to help Gotham, that he felt called to something more direct and hands-on. Though he wasn't sure what form that might take, Selina shared her own desire to make a difference, to use her knowledge of art and history to help preserve beauty and culture for future generations. As winter deepened, they developed rituals that brought them comfort and joy. Sunday mornings became their time for long walks through different neighborhoods, exploring parts of Gotham neither had visited before. They would stop at small cafes for breakfast, browse through used bookstores, and visit local museums or galleries. These explorations helped them both see their city with fresh eyes, discovering hidden gems and quiet corners that felt like secrets shared between them. Tuesday evenings were reserved for cooking together in Selina's small kitchen. Bruce, who had grown up with a staff to handle all domestic tasks, was initially hopeless at anything more complicated than boiling water. But Selina was a patient teacher, showing him how to choose fresh ingredients at the market and guiding him through simple recipes that filled her apartment with wonderful smells. They would work side by side, talking and laughing as they chopped vegetables and stirred sauces, the domestic intimacy creating a bond that felt more meaningful than any expensive dinner could have provided. Friday nights became their movie nights, though they rarely made it through an entire film. They would start with good intentions, curled up together on Selina's couch with homemade popcorn and hot chocolate. But inevitably, one of them would make a comment about the story or the cinematography, leading to discussions that were far more engaging than whatever was playing on the screen. They would pause the movie to debate plot points or share related stories from their own lives, the film becoming merely a starting point for deeper conversation. Through all these shared experiences, Bruce and Selina were building something neither had quite expected. What had begun as attraction and intellectual compatibility was growing into genuine partnership. They challenged each other to think differently while providing comfort and support. They shared jokes and inside references that made them feel like conspirators in their own private world. Most importantly, they were learning to trust each other with their authentic selves, letting down the guards they'd both learned to maintain in a world that often felt unsafe or unwelcoming. Bruce found that Selina's presence in his life made everything feel more vivid and meaningful. Colors seemed brighter when she was around. Food tasted better when shared with her. And even mundane activities became interesting when experienced through her perspective. She had a way of noticing details he missed and finding beauty in unexpected places. Her enthusiasm for art and literature was contagious, inspiring him to pay closer attention to the aesthetic aspects of life he'd previously overlooked. Selina discovered that Bruce's steady presence gave her permission to dream bigger than she'd previously dared. His quiet confidence in her abilities made her believe she could achieve goals that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. He never made her feel small or limited by her circumstances, instead treating her intelligence and insights as valuable contributions to their discussions. His respect for her independence meant she never felt like she was losing herself in the relationship, but rather becoming a fuller version of who she'd always been. As spring arrived in Gotham, their relationship entered a new phase of comfortable intimacy. The cherry blossoms along the riverfront bloomed in pale pink clouds, and Bruce and Selina began taking evening walks through the botanical gardens, their conversations flowing as naturally as the streams that wound through the landscaped paths. These weren't the rushed meetings of their early courtship, but leisurely strolls where they could simply enjoy being together without agenda or destination. Bruce had begun to notice how Selina moved through the world with a grace that seemed almost feline. She stepped carefully but confidently, always aware of her surroundings in a way that made him feel protective and admiring at the same time. When they walked together, she would occasionally pause to examine a flower or watch a bird, her attention fully absorbed in these small moments of beauty. Bruce learned to slow down during these times, to appreciate the way she found wonder in details that others might pass by without noticing. Selina, meanwhile, had begun to see past Bruce's carefully maintained composure to the passionate heart underneath. When he spoke about social justice or his hopes for Gotham's future, his eyes would light up with an intensity that revealed depths she was still discovering. She noticed how he listened to everyone they encountered with genuine interest, from the elderly man who fed pigeons in the park to the young mother struggling with a stroller on the library steps. Bruce didn't just hear people's words. He absorbed their stories and seemed to file them away as pieces of a larger puzzle he was trying to solve. Their conversations during this period began to touch on bigger questions about purpose and meaning. Bruce spoke more openly about feeling restless in his current role, about wanting to contribute something more substantial to Gotham than just writing checks and attending board meetings. He described a growing sense that he had skills and resources that weren't being fully utilized, that there was something important he was meant to do but hadn't yet discovered. Selina understood this restlessness because she felt something similar. Her work at the library was fulfilling, but she found herself drawn to stories about art recovery and cultural preservation. She would spend her free time reading about lost masterpieces and stolen artifacts, fascinated by the detective work involved in tracking down missing pieces of history. Sometimes she would joke that she should have been born in an earlier era, when adventurous women could become archaeologists or art historians who traveled the world in search of hidden treasures. One afternoon, as they sat in the library's reading room, sharing a book about Renaissance art, Selina pointed to a photograph of a stolen painting that had never been recovered. She traced the image with her finger, describing the technique the artist had used and explaining why the piece was considered so valuable. Bruce watched her face as she spoke, noting the way her eyes sparkled with interest and how her voice took on a different quality when she discussed something she was passionate about. That evening, as they walked home together, Bruce found himself thinking about Selina's expertise and enthusiasm for art history. An idea began to form in his mind, something that could combine her knowledge with his resources to make a real difference. Wayne Enterprises had connections with museums and cultural institutions around the world, and there was certainly funding available for the right kind of cultural preservation project. He began to imagine ways they might work together on something meaningful, though he kept these thoughts to himself while the ideas were still taking shape. Their relationship had developed its own language of small gestures and shared understandings. When Bruce arrived at the library, looking particularly tired after a difficult board meeting, Selina would simply appear at his side with a cup of tea and a book of poetry, knowing that reading would help him decompress better than talking about whatever was troubling him. When Selina seemed overwhelmed by a research project or frustrated with a difficult patron, Bruce would suggest a walk through their favorite neighborhood, understanding that movement in fresh air helped her think more clearly. They had learned to read each other's moods and needs with remarkable accuracy. Bruce could tell by the set of Selina's shoulders whether she'd had a good day or a challenging one, while Selina could gauge Bruce's stress level by observing how he held his coffee cup or the rhythm of his footsteps. This intuitive understanding created a foundation of care and consideration that made both of them feel truly seen and supported. As their one-year anniversary approached, Bruce began planning something special to mark the occasion. He wanted to create an experience that would reflect everything they'd shared and discovered about each other. But he also wanted it to point toward the future they might build together. The idea that had been forming in his mind about combining their interests and talents had grown more concrete, and he thought their anniversary might be the perfect time to share this vision with Selina. Meanwhile, Selina had been doing some planning of her own. She'd been working on a project in secret, using her research skills to trace the history of the Wayne family's art collection. She'd discovered some fascinating details about pieces that had been donated to museums or sold over the years, including several works that seemed to have disappeared during the chaos following Thomas and Martha Wayne's deaths. Her research had revealed a pattern that suggested these pieces might not have been properly cataloged or secured, and she thought Bruce might be interested in what had become of his family's cultural legacy. The spring evening they'd chosen for their celebration was perfect, with clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of blooming flowers through the open windows of the small restaurant where they'd had their first official date. They had requested the same corner table where they'd sat a year earlier, and the familiar setting brought back memories of their early conversations and the nervous excitement of getting to know each other. Over dinner, they reminisced about their favorite moments from the past year, laughing about Bruce's early attempts at cooking and Selina's patient efforts to teach him the difference between various types of pasta. They remembered the Sunday morning when they'd gotten caught in an unexpected rainstorm and taken shelter in a tiny bookshop, spending 3 hours browsing and reading to each other while waiting for the weather to clear. They talked about the evening they'd attended a lecture on medieval art and ended up debating the speaker's conclusions until the museum staff politely asked them to continue their discussion elsewhere. As the evening progressed, Bruce found himself growing more nervous about sharing his idea with Selina. He'd spent weeks refining the concept, researching similar programs, and even having preliminary conversations with contacts in the art world. But suddenly, he worried that she might see it as presumptuous, that he was trying to solve her career challenges with his wealth rather than respecting her independence and capability. Selina, meanwhile, was experiencing her own bout of nervousness about presenting her research to Bruce. She'd been careful to approach the topic of his family's art collection objectively, as a historical puzzle rather than a personal matter. But she knew that anything involving his parents' legacy would be emotionally significant, and she didn't want Bruce to feel she'd been prying into private family business, even with the best of intentions. Finally, as they shared dessert and watched other couples at nearby tables, Bruce took a deep breath and began to explain his idea. He spoke about his growing conviction that Wayne Enterprises should be doing more to support cultural preservation, about the possibility of establishing a program that would help museums and institutions recover and protect stolen or lost artworks. He explained how such a program could combine cutting-edge technology with traditional research methods, creating opportunities for art historians and conservators to make real discoveries, while also serving the larger goal of preserving cultural heritage. As Bruce talked, Selina's eyes grew wider with excitement and recognition. The program he was describing was remarkably similar to the kind of work she'd been dreaming about. The perfect combination of scholarship and adventure that would allow her to use her skills in service of something meaningful. But more than that, she was moved by the realization that Bruce had been thinking about her interests and aspirations, looking for ways to help her achieve her goals without compromising her independence. When Bruce finished outlining his vision, Selina was quiet for a moment, processing everything he'd shared. Then, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folder containing all her research about the Wayne family's lost art collection. She slid it across the table with a smile, explaining that she'd been working on something that might be relevant to his idea. As Bruce opened the folder and began reading through her meticulous documentation, his expression shifted from surprise to amazement to something approaching wonder. The information Selina had compiled was extraordinary, not just for its thoroughness, but for the implications of what she discovered. Several valuable pieces that had disappeared after his parents' death appeared to have been sold through questionable channels, while others seemed to have simply vanished without any record of their disposition. Her research suggested that with the right resources and expertise, it might be possible to trace at least some of these works and potentially recover them for public display. As they discussed Selina's findings and Bruce's program concept, both began to see how perfectly their ideas complemented each other. What Bruce had envisioned as an abstract program suddenly had a concrete first project, while Selina's research had found the institutional support and resources it needed to move from theory to practice. More importantly, they realized they had stumbled upon something that could be their first real collaboration, a way of combining their different strengths and perspectives in service of a shared goal. The conversation continued long after the restaurant had emptied of other diners, the staff politely cleaning around them, while Bruce and Selina sketched out possibilities on napkins and shared increasingly excited ideas about what they might accomplish together. By the time they finally left the restaurant, they had the framework for what would eventually become the Wayne Foundation's Cultural Recovery Initiative, though they didn't yet know it would grow into something that significant. Walking home under the streetlights, their hands intertwined and their minds buzzing with plans and possibilities, both Bruce and Selina felt they had crossed an important threshold in their relationship. They were no longer just two people who enjoyed each other's company and shared similar values. They had become partners in the truest sense, individuals who could dream together and work together toward goals that mattered to both of them. The weeks following their anniversary dinner were filled with research and planning as they worked to turn their vision into reality. Bruce used his business connections to set up meetings with museum directors and art recovery experts, while Selina dove deeper into her investigation of missing artworks, expanding her research beyond the Wayne collection to include other significant losses in the region. They would meet every evening to share what they'd learned, their conversations becoming increasingly technical as they delved into the complexities of art authentication, insurance claims, and international recovery law. During this period, their relationship took on a new dimension of intellectual partnership that enhanced, rather than replaced, the romantic connection they'd been building. They challenged each other's assumptions and built on each other's ideas, the collaborative process revealing new facets of their personalities and capabilities. Bruce discovered that Selina had an exceptional talent for seeing patterns and connections that others missed, while Selina found that Bruce's business acumen and systematic approach could transform ambitious ideas into practical action plans. Their first real breakthrough came when Selina's research uncovered a connection between several missing paintings and a series of estate sales that had taken place in Gotham during the 1990s. The sales had been handled by a company that no longer existed, but the documentation suggested that proper provenance research hadn't been conducted on many of the pieces. Bruce's contacts in the legal world helped them understand how such situations could be addressed, and they began to see a path forward that could potentially recover not just artwork, but also establish precedents for future cases. As spring turned to summer, Bruce and Selina found themselves working together with an intensity and focus that surprised them both. Their complementary skills made them an effective team. But more than that, they discovered they genuinely enjoyed the collaborative process. The long hours of research and analysis felt less like work and more like an extended intellectual adventure they were sharing. Their different perspectives enriched their understanding of each case they investigated, and their mutual respect and trust allowed them to take creative risks they might not have attempted alone. One evening, as they sat in Selina's apartment, surrounded by stacks of documents and reference books, Bruce looked up from the legal brief he was reviewing to watch Selina work. She was cross-referencing auction records with museum acquisitions databases, her brow furrowed in concentration as she made notes in the margins of various documents. The lamplight caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair, and Bruce found himself thinking about how beautiful she looked when she was completely absorbed in something she cared about. As if sensing his attention, Selina glanced up and caught him watching her. Instead of being embarrassed, Bruce smiled and told her how much he admired her dedication and expertise, how working with her on this project had shown him aspects of her intelligence and creativity he was still discovering. Selina set down her pen and moved to sit beside him on the couch, taking his hands in hers and telling him that she felt the same way about their partnership, that seeing him apply his talents to something meaningful had deepened her respect and affection for him. That night, as they cleaned up their research materials and prepared for bed, both Bruce and Selina realized they had found something rare and precious. They had built a relationship that encompassed not just romantic love, but genuine friendship, intellectual partnership, and shared purpose. They complemented each other in ways that made them both stronger and more capable, while still maintaining their individual identities and independence. It was the kind of connection that people spend their whole lives searching for, and they were both grateful and slightly amazed to have discovered it so early in their adult lives. Their summer days developed a gentle rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Bruce would arrive at the library each morning with 2 cups of coffee and a pastry from the bakery down the street, finding Selina already at work organizing research materials or corresponding with museum contacts around the world. They had claimed a corner table near the large windows where morning light streamed across their documents, creating a workspace that felt both professional and intimate. Other library patrons had grown accustomed to seeing them there, heads bent together over old photographs in auction catalogs, their quiet conversations punctuated by moments of excitement when they uncovered a new lead or made an unexpected connection. The Cultural Recovery Initiative was beginning to take shape as more than just an ambitious idea. Bruce had secured initial funding through Wayne Enterprises, while Selina had established relationships with art historians and conservators who were eager to contribute their expertise to the project. Their first official case involved a series of impressionist paintings that had disappeared from a private collection during the Second World War, and their methodical approach to tracing ownership had already yielded promising results. They worked with the patient persistence of archaeologists, understanding that meaningful discoveries required time and careful attention to detail. What made their collaboration so effective was the way they balanced each other's strengths and compensated for each other's blind spots. When Bruce became too focused on the business aspects of their work, Selina would remind him of the human stories behind each missing artwork, the families who had lost treasured pieces, and the communities whose cultural heritage had been scattered. When Selina became emotionally invested in a particularly compelling case, Bruce would help her step back and consider the practical limitations they faced, ensuring their efforts remained focused and achievable. Their research had led them to develop innovative methods that combined traditional scholarship with modern technology. Bruce had arranged for Wayne Enterprises to purchase specialized software that could analyze brushstrokes and paint composition, while Selina had created detailed databases that tracked ownership patterns and identified suspicious gaps in provenance records. They had learned to work with forensic accountants and insurance investigators, expanding their network to include professionals who could help them follow money trails and uncover fraudulent transactions. One particularly satisfying case involved a small bronze sculpture that had been stolen from a Gotham museum decades earlier. Selina's research had traced it through several private sales before it surfaced at an auction house in another city. Bruce's legal contacts helped them document the theft and establish the museum's rightful claim, while Selina worked with the auction house to arrange the sculpture's return. The day they watched it being carefully reinstalled in its original display case, both Bruce and Selina felt a deep sense of accomplishment that went beyond professional satisfaction. They had helped restore something beautiful to its proper place in the world. Their evenings had taken on a different quality as their work became more demanding. Instead of leisurely dinners and long walks, they often found themselves grabbing quick meals between meetings or working late into the night to meet deadlines for legal filings or research reports. But even during these busier periods, they made sure to preserve moments of connection and intimacy. Bruce would massage Selina's shoulders when she'd been hunched over documents for too long, while Selina would remind Bruce to take breaks and step outside for fresh air when his stress levels began to climb. They had developed small rituals that helped them transition between their work life and their personal relationship. Each evening, regardless of how busy they'd been, they would spend at least a few minutes sitting together without discussing business, sharing observations about the day, or simply enjoying each other's quiet presence. These moments of stillness became increasingly precious as their project gained momentum and attracted attention from the broader art recovery community. By midsummer, their success with several high-profile cases had begun to attract media attention and invitations to speak at conferences and symposiums. Bruce was initially reluctant to accept public recognition, preferring to let their work speak for itself. But Selina convinced him that visibility could help them reach more people who might have information about missing artworks. She had a natural gift for explaining complex research methods in accessible terms, while Bruce's business background helped him communicate with institutional leaders and potential funders. Their first joint presentation was at a gathering of museum professionals in New York, where they outlined their methods and shared case studies from their most successful recoveries. Standing together on the conference stage, Bruce and Selina felt a new kind of partnership emerging, one that extended their private collaboration into the public sphere. The positive response from their audience confirmed that their work was filling a genuine need in the cultural community, and they returned to Gotham with renewed energy and several promising new leads to investigate. As autumn approached, Bruce and Selina realized Their relationship had evolved in ways neither had anticipated when they first met in the Wayne Manor Library. They had become true partners in every sense, sharing professional goals, personal dreams, and daily life with an ease that felt both comfortable and exciting. Their love had deepened through shared challenges and successes, while their individual growth had been supported and encouraged by their connection to each other. The changing seasons brought new cases and new opportunities for their cultural recovery initiative. They had established a small office in downtown Gotham with proper equipment for analyzing artworks and secure storage for sensitive documents. Bruce had hired additional staff to help with research and administrative tasks, while Selina had begun teaching workshops for other art historians interested in recovery methods. Their work was expanding beyond what either had imagined possible, but the foundation remained their partnership and the trust they had built together. One crisp October evening, as they walked through the same neighborhood where they had first held hands during that snowy December night a year earlier, Bruce and Selina found themselves talking about the future with a new sense of certainty and shared vision. They spoke about expanding their program to work with international partners, about establishing educational scholarships for students interested in art recovery, about the possibility of writing a book that would share their methods with a broader audience. But more than professional plans, they talked about their personal future with the quiet confidence of two people who had found something rare and lasting. They discussed the kind of home they wanted to create together, the values they wanted to share, the adventures they hoped to experience side by side. These weren't the nervous conversations of early romance, but the thoughtful planning of mature partners who understood each other's dreams and were committed to helping each other achieve them. Their relationship had become a source of strength that supported everything else they did. When Bruce faced difficult decisions about Wayne Enterprises or struggled with the weight of his family's legacy, Selina's perspective and encouragement helped him find clarity and confidence. When Selina encountered skepticism from colleagues who questioned her unconventional research methods or doubted her expertise because of her background, Bruce's unwavering belief in her abilities gave her the courage to persist and prove herself through results. As the seasons turned and their love story continued to unfold in the quiet corners of Gotham, Bruce and Selina discovered that the greatest treasures aren't always found in ancient artifacts or recovered masterpieces. Sometimes they're discovered in the gentle rhythm of two hearts beating in harmony, in the comfort of shared silence, and in the simple joy of building something beautiful together. Their story reminds us that love, like the finest art, grows more precious with time and careful tending. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, may you carry with you the warmth of their connection and the peaceful knowledge that somewhere in the world, gentle love stories are still being written, one quiet moment at a time.